Hey, this is manic.mercurian. Thanks for coming back. We saw a lot of huge developments last week with Mercury moving direct now and also with the Sun entering Capricorn. So, really, we're in a very new environment as we go into this week. I do think things will be a little bit more straightforward, a little bit more linear, especially for those of us that are born with Mercury direct in our charts. That's about 87% of us. We're going to be gaining traction, gaining momentum, moving forward in a much simpler way, I think, this week. And with Sun in Capricorn, that is still a relatively difficult transit, don't get me wrong. We have just recently started winter, and so we're moving into Capricorn season, moving into winter in the Northern Hemisphere. It is generally a difficult time for us. I do think Capricorn is one of the most difficult signs for transits in general, especially for the Sun. The other one is Scorpio, in case you're wondering. But really, fall and winter in general are the more difficult seasons astrologically. And the reason why is because with the spring and summer signs, those are the signs where the sun, moon, and the inner planets have their domicile. Fall and winter are the signs where the sun, moon, and inner planets have their detriment or their fall typically. So yeah, it's just generally, it's colder, it's harsher, I guess you could say, but still, we have to keep in mind Mercury's direct. We're moving forward. Mars has recently stationed retrograde a couple weeks ago, so that is an area of some tension, of rethinking things, rethinking our desires, our ambitions. What do we truly want? Where do we find our pride, kind of, with Mars in Leo? We're rethinking all those things, and that energy is a little bit more, I don't know, pressurized or difficult. It's kind of turned inward or backward. So that is an area of maybe some contention. But other than that, we are very much moving forward this week. Mercury is still hanging back in Sagittarius, but he's picking up speed, moving forward. So we are doing that as well. I believe Mercury's still in the post shadow here. So we're still dealing with many of the same themes that we dealt with during Mercury retrograde a couple weeks ago, but it's in a much more productive way, much more straightforward. We're not digging things up anymore. We are putting them away and moving onward and upward, if that makes sense. We do have a couple major things to talk about for this week. Jupiter is squaring Saturn, which is a big deal. It's always a big deal whenever outer planets make a major aspect like that. We have Chiron stationing direct, and then I will talk about what Christmas looks like, just for those of you who celebrate that. But before we talk about that, I did want to let you know I am still doing personal readings. They're very competitively priced. They make great gifts, for sure. I've been doing a lot of gift readings. And yeah, they're great fun, and really it just helps support the channel and allows me to post content like this. So thanks so much to those of you who have gotten readings. But for information on that, go to manic.mercurian.net. Should be a link on your screen at the top there. Okay, but let's talk about this week's forecast. I'll give you the day-by-day rundown. So starting for Monday, December 23rd, we have the moon in Libra. By the way, moon only goes through technically 3 signs this week, which is kind of unusual. It just has to do with like the way the days are kind of sliced relative to the moon's transits. Moon will just be going through Libra, Scorpio, Sagittarius this week. So Monday we have moon in Libra all day. Not the worst place for the moon to be in. However, we are still just coming off of that third quarter moon that we had one day prior. So many of us may still be feeling restless, or we still may be, having epiphanies or other changes in our perception, new ideas, different ways of looking at things. We're still coming off of that high from that increased energy from that third quarter moon. So it's not quite as peaceful as moon in Libra would typically be. It's kind of clashing with the sun in Capricorn. 2 aspects here. Sun at 2, well, my notes say 2 degrees. I think that's right. Sun at 2 degrees Capricorn squares the nodes at 2 degrees Libra and Aries. So it looks like that happens late in the day, Eastern time. And basically, this doesn't have super dominating effects on our experience, but I like to always give it a shout out because it basically just means that we are halfway in between eclipse seasons. We had one last early fall kind of, and then we have one coming up in late winter, early spring. So yeah, we're just at that halfway point, if that makes sense. We're as far away from eclipse season as you can possibly get right now. But I did mention how that third quarter moon on Sunday, because it was conjunct the south node, it's actually almost reminiscent of an eclipse in terms of its kind of feeling of the themes that is brought up by that third quarter moon. So we are still kind of coming off of some of that weird energy, and again maybe making a lot of breakthroughs spiritually or mentally because of that nodal kind of influence. We have one other aspect today, that would be Venus sextiling Chiron. And Chiron is preparing to station direct as well. That won't happen until the end of the week, but I do think it's interesting. Venus makes this really beautiful aspect to Chiron before it does go direct. Sextiles are always beautiful and harmonious, but especially coming from Venus as well. So basically, Chiron's been retrograde. Chiron's in Aries. And it basically just means that we're really like looking within ourselves, and we have been for many months by now, looking inward and really thinking about our truth and our traumas and things like that. It's very kind of intense, very personal, and much of it is kind of happening on a collective level. So we may have been a little bit less volatile or less active. There may have been a little bit less kind of like protests and things like that because Chiron is retrograde. But with this sextile from Venus, there's this harmony there. So this may allow us to kind of open up and have some perhaps deep conversations. Maybe conversations about issues that would usually be triggering or emotional. We may be able to have those in a more peaceful way now. And I think this is especially true because of the sign that Venus is in. Venus is in Aquarius. So that sextile coming from Venus and Aquarius, it's really helping us to, look at everyone's perspective, think about the big picture, which is very complementary. Chiron in Aries is very personal. It's very subjective. It has to do with our own, individual experience and trauma. So having that sextile from Venus in Aquarius, very different energy. I really do think that's very balancing, but this is not something that everyone will experience in a really dramatic way. Chiron aspects tend to be a little bit subtle, especially as sextiles. Sextiles are not as intense as squares or trines, so don't worry too much about that. But yeah, other than that, the main thing is just coming off of that third quarter moon. We still have some of that kind of energy lingering around from the day before. That's what we have for Monday, and honestly, I don't think that's the worst day to start a week for those of us that are like working. It's definitely a great day to start things still. Kind of similar to Sunday as well. For Tuesday, December 24th, Moon continues cruising on through Libra. Technically, the Moon is squaring the Sun by sign, but really not by aspect at all. Sun is, still in the first few degrees of Capricorn, so Moon has basically moved on. I think most of that, intensity from the third quarter Moon has pretty much dissipated by now. Since Moon is, kind of going into that last trimester, last decan of Libra. Today we do have something really major going on though, and that is Jupiter squaring Saturn. I know I'm going to feel this one because it's sitting right on my ascendant. Jupiter is. But anyway, so for us in general, whenever outer planets aspect each other, it's a big deal. Outer planets change kind of the background experience. This has more to do with months and years rather than days and weeks, generally speaking. So in other words, this aspect is exact on Tuesday, December 24th, Christmas Eve. but this is a slow-moving aspect. We're really going to feel this for much of this week, and we may have even felt it last week as well. This shows that we have some kind of intense and immense change going on a societal level. This may be a little bit hard to pin down because it's a very scattered energy. Jupiter's in Gemini, Saturn's in Pisces. They're both in mutable signs, so that really indicates that we're very much in a transitional period right now. We're in an ending phase. Excuse me. This is largely because so many planets are changing signs next year. Every planet is changing signs in 2025 except for Pluto, and Pluto just changed signs last month. So basically every single planet either just changed signs already or is about to next year. All the other planets are basically shifting. So in other words, like there's this huge new beginning that's really going to happen next year, especially around May, June of next year. So before that new beginning, we have to go through an ending phase, and that's what we see with these kind of mutable outer planets, Jupiter and Gemini, Saturn and Pisces, they are clashing. They are, they're in different elements. So Jupiter and Gemini shows that we want to be kind of detached and curious and intellectual. But Saturn and Pisces is asking for us to get real and grow up spiritually and emotionally. So these two, the energies are similar but different. They both show that we're in an ending phase. But because they're squaring now, that really shows that we're going to, experience some kind of like turbulence or sudden change with this. Like we're really seeing that this past phase is ending. Really, I would say 2023, 2024 were all kind of one kind of mini era, if that makes sense, with Saturn and Neptune in Pisces. So it's been a really kind of hopeless era. I saw that before it actually started, of course. I think as a people we've lost direction, we've lost hope. We don't really know what's real anymore. We're in this kind of fog and this mist. Everything seems chaotic and unpredictable. It's because it's very much a Piscean era. Okay, so that's still happening now, but there's some kind of huge shift here on a background political level, and it's making room, it's clearing things up, and it's ending. Endings are not always simple or straightforward. Usually, astrologically, with the mutable signs, we see the energy fluctuating. Like the mutable signs happen at the end of seasons. So that's what we're seeing now. It's not like a clear-cut ending. It's more, it's like things are kind of constantly changing now because we're in that transitional period, if that makes sense. So yeah, I wish I could be more specific. I can't predict exactly the very specific changes politically, but I can see that things are dramatically changing, and it's very scattered. There's kind of change coming from all directions. Anywhere you look, I would expect some pretty interesting news stories to be going on right now, because it's just scattered. Any one mutable placement would already be scattered and multifaceted enough on its own, but combining two of them like this, especially two kind of outer planets, they're pretty like heavy lifters, so to speak. It's very scattered, it's very chaotic, and again, it's hard to make sense of. Pisces and Gemini are maybe the two most kind of slippery and adaptable signs out of all of them. So yeah, as a society, it looks like we have some kind of flexibility. We're open to some kind of change, and that change is coming very rapidly. Oh, one last thing about that too, because this is Christmas Eve, this could have very kind of intense ramifications for many of us. So in other words, like the day before Christmas, again, for those of you who celebrate that it's going to be a weird day. It's going to be intense. There could be some very large life changes happening right now. But what those life changes are exactly, it really depends on your chart and where 14 of Gemini and Pisces fall there. Okay. What houses do you have around those 2 points? What planets do you have around there? That's where I would expect some kind of huge change. Of course, 14 Gemini is a much more expansive area because of Jupiter. 14 Pisces is kind of the opposite. It's much more constrictive. But there's this clash here. We're having to deal with these two very different areas. So look to where those fall in your chart to see where these life changes are happening for you. Let's look at Wednesday, December 25th. This is Christmas Day for many of us, and we see the moon leaving Libra and entering Scorpio very early in the day, Eastern time. And so yeah, basically for Christmas, we're going to have Sun in Capricorn, Moon in Scorpio. These are two very like kind of heavy and intense signs and energies, but I do really like that we have a sextile between the moon and the sun today. Really beautiful. You can see that at noon Eastern time with moon at 4 Scorpio, sextiling sun at 4 Capricorn. So again, even though they are typically kind of heavy, and I would say actually the most difficult signs, that aspect really makes all the difference. That aspect shows some kind of harmony here. Sun in Capricorn is very materialistic, very goal-oriented. We're starting to think about the future. We're starting to think about the next year that's coming. And so yeah, it's very it's very earthy, it's very practical. There's this pragmaticism that comes with Sun transiting through Capricorn. So Moon in Scorpio complements that really nicely. Moon in Scorpio is also very I don't know, logical, practical, it can be analytical, but there's also this really heavy emotional component that really blends with Capricorn very nicely. So yeah, it looks generally like a good day. I know that we had, some really intense aspects. I mean, mostly just the Jupiter squaring Saturn. That is, to some extent still happening. That is very intense. That is going on in the background. But again, Moon sextiling Sun does that is a very harmonious energy. So really great to have for a holiday. For Thursday, December 26th, Moon continues through Scorpio. It's no longer aspecting the Sun. It's no longer sextiling by aspect, but it still is by sign. So we still have that really complementary energy between Capricorn Sun and Scorpio Moon. Look at this balance, by the way, as well. Moon in Scorpio, Mercury in Sagittarius, Sun in Capricorn, Venus in Aquarius. All four of these kind of inner solar system placements, they're all in different signs, they're all in different elements, so I think things are really balanced there. Mars is in Leo, so that would be, a little bit more fire to the mix for sure. But because Mars is retrograde, it's not bringing up themes that we would typically associate with fire signs. It's much more internalized and kind of slow and heavy. So really, I do think things are very elementally balanced right now. Whatever kind of elemental makeup that your chart leans to, you can probably, utilize this. You can be in your element on some level here, because no matter what your chart is, you're going to have a mix right now of harsh and harmonious aspects right now. Of course, there could be some exceptions with a really twisted chart if your chart is really oriented a certain kind of very unique way. But generally speaking, it's hard to imagine a birth chart that won't have some easy and some hard aspects right now. So yeah, dare I say things look a little bit balanced. This is about as this is kind of what I look for, looking for an easy day on a collective level. That balance is really, complementary. We can use, a little bit of fire and zest from the fire element, that warmth and spontaneity from air as well, the detachedness, the intellect, the practical nature of Earth, of Sun and Capricorn, and then the emotionality of the water. We can use all of that, so that's really nice to see, honestly. And that continues as well. That's not just specifically for Thursday. That I really think that's applying really to this entire week, but especially with Moon and Scorpio. I really think that extra water balances things really nicely. Okay, Friday, December 27th, Moon continues through Scorpio. Moon will enter Sagittarius late in the day, Eastern time. And in doing so, Moon is approaching Mercury. And so, Mercury's been through a lot. Mercury's had only, I guess by this point, Mercury's had almost 2 weeks direct. And Mercury's picking up steam. So, Mercury, because it just recently retrograded, it shows that we've gone through a lot, especially with Sagittarius, with, the joy, the optimism. We've had to kind of lose all that in order to re-find it again. And that has been very painful, but that's not news. That's old news. We've already talked about that. The reason why I'm talking about it is because with Moon approaching Mercury, it's bringing up these themes again. It's really kind of starting to highlight that area for us. But in general, because Mercury is direct and Moon is now entering Sagittarius, suddenly the chart leans much more towards Sagittarius. We are very hopeful, very optimistic. Really, right now, it may almost feel more like Sagittarius season rather than Capricorn season, because although Sun is in Capricorn, there are no other Capricorn planets, which is a little bit unusual. Sun is not usually alone like that. So yeah, it may almost feel more like November or early December. Well, yeah, I guess most of December or late November falls in Sagittarius season. It may almost feel more, very warm, very fitting for the holidays. Very great time for travel, or maybe not literally because it's probably a nightmare traveling right now. But when it comes to experiencing something new, experiencing either a new physical experience, a new concept, that's what Sagittarius is all about. So yeah, not exactly what we usually experience this time of year. Okay, we have one aspect for Friday. That would be Mercury squaring Saturn, and I forgot to mention Thursday, Mercury opposes Jupiter. And I really want to combine both of these together. Thursday and Friday, Mercury first opposes Jupiter, and then one day after squares Saturn. Basically, these two things, I don't see them as two aspects. I see it as one aspect. It's a T-square. It's a T-square from, Jupiter and Saturn are still, they only very recently made that square aspect. So they're still, less than a degree away from that exact square. And Mercury cruising through 13, 14 degrees Sagittarius, Mercury is making that T-square. You can see that huge kind of glaring red triangle on the screen. So yeah, that's, in a way, this, Thursday and Friday may almost be more intense than Tuesday. Tuesday is where we actually saw that exact Jupiter-Saturn square. But because Mercury is stepping into this T-square and triggering, the opposition and the square with both of them, sometimes, okay, when it comes to like predicting things, sometimes the release of energy that we would expect from an aspect like Jupiter square Saturn, and I'll show you that day now, sometimes that doesn't actually get released or triggered until we have a different planet kind of come into some kind of aspect. So that's what we're seeing here. Tuesday, maybe something does technically shift on a major level, but it may not truly get triggered. We might not truly experience that like release of intense energy until Thursday, Friday. So yeah, there's some kind of huge change. We need to make some kind of change, but we may be pulled in different directions. It's hard to know where to go. There may be this huge crossroads here. It's all very scattered. Now we're bringing in 3 different mutable signs, 3 different mutable placements. The mutable signs are so scattered, they're so multifaceted. We ourselves have to be multifaceted to go through this. There's so much change that's being brought up by this T-square. And it's unpredictable. The mutable signs are kind of unpredictable. They're all over the place. They appear to contradict themselves because they are not consistent, So that's what we are going through right now. Yeah, it's very hard to make sense of, but it looks exciting. It looks like a time where we need to make some kind of huge change. But again, what exactly that change is may not be clear until after this aspect has subsided a little bit. So that even continues into Saturday, really. I mean, by Saturday, Mercury's at 15 Sagittarius. Excuse me. These readings, whenever I do a reading or a video, it channels everything up and I get congested or I'll start burping. It's really nasty, but it's, I don't know why that happened, so I'm sorry. But Saturday, December 28th. Yeah, okay, so Mercury, roughly halfway through Sagittarius. Moon crosses over Mercury as well, late in the day, Eastern time. So now, again, this T-square is not exact, and you can see that by looking at, the lines aren't as strong. That's what the chart is showing. But still, Jupiter at 13 Gemini, Saturn at 14 Pisces, Mercury at 15 Sagittarius, they're all easily within orb of that T-square still. And now, as Moon crosses over late Saturday or maybe early Sunday, depending on your time zone, it's bringing even more of a focus there. So again, we have one of those situations where, these aspects aren't exact anymore, but because Moon and Mercury are involved now, we're involving more planets, more placements. We're putting more energy there. So really, I mean, I hadn't looked at it with this level of detail before shooting the forecast, but it really looks like this entire week is dominated by these T-squares, or the squares, the opposition. It's mutable. Look to your mutable placements. What do you have in Sagittarius, Pisces, Gemini, or even Virgo, especially around halfway through those signs? Let's just say between 10 and 16 degrees of the mutable signs. Those placements are going to be hit by this in a really hard way. If you don't have any placements around there, it's still going to be a crazy week. It's still going to be a time of change, but it's not going to be as pronounced for you without those mutable placements. But if you have mutable placements, especially in those middle degrees, in the, let's again, maybe 10 to 16 degrees, 10 to 17 degrees maybe, if you do have those placements, that's where there's going to be huge change for you. Okay, so if it's your Venus, your values are changing, maybe your love life is changing, or your finances. If it's your Mars in one of those areas, then it's your ambitions that are changing. If it's your Sun or your Ascendant, you are changing. Your identity is changing. Even Moon as well. Your core personality would be changing. Whatever it is. And you can apply that to the houses as well. And again, I can't always specifically predict exactly what is happening, but I can predict it's a crazy day. There's a lot of change. There's lots of energy. And again, you can look to, what houses do these areas fall in as well. If this is, I mean, for some people, if you have, let's say, Pisces midheaven, and your ascendant would be maybe around Gemini, depending on the chart, depending on the latitude. Um, it just depends on how your chart is situated. With a chart like that, your whole identity and your career might be changing a lot around this week. But again, it just depends. For some people, it'll be their home lives. For other people, it'll be their relationships, partnerships, whatever. It depends. But yeah, huge change for all of us in different ways. We have another square on Saturday as well, which kind of has nothing to do with those T squares. It's not really involved there. But we do have Venus squaring Uranus. And this is really interesting because they're in mutual reception. So, Venus is in Aquarius, but she would really be much more at home in Taurus, where Uranus is. Uranus is in Taurus, but he would be much more at home in Aquarius, where Venus is. So, it's like they're calling each other from each other's houses. And, the ancients would say because they are in each other's signs of rulership, they can basically act as good hosts for each other. So that's really great. That sounds very lovey-dovey. The problem, though, is that this is a square. It's a contentious aspect. So it's really strange. It's like they are good hosts for each other. They're taking care of each other, and they're connecting. They're having this conversation. But it's like they're arguing, though, still. They aren't agreeing. They aren't seeing eye to eye. They're clashing. Okay, so this brings up more change. Squares always bring up change. Squares have to do with action and change. I don't know how else to say it. And basically with this one, Uranus, it's the energy of earthquakes. Uranus itself brings up immense change as well. So with Venus having this square, it just shows our values, our pleasure, what we are desiring. All that is changing in a really immense way. We may not be super selfish necessarily with this aspect. We're thinking more about like what's good for us on a collective level, what's good holistically, what does the greater situation look like, and how can we find the most pleasurable thing in a really big picture type of way. That's what Venus and Aquarius would suggest. But with this square to Uranus, that's changing in a very immense way. The pleasure is changing, the values are changing. I would also expect like economic volatility here as well. Venus is one of the money planets. It has to do with money. There are other planets that do as well, like Mercury, and outer planets can have to do with the economy in a more long-term way. But anyway, Venus does have to do with values. What is valued? Assets and things like that. So having this square, especially from Uranus, which is in Taurus, which also has to do with money, the economy has been dramatically changing ever since Uranus entered Taurus in 2018, but it hasn't always been consistent. With an aspect like this, we could expect, I don't know, maybe, stocks that were undervalued before are now much more valued, or vice versa. It's changing. It's very dynamic. Other than that, despite all the change, I do think the main focus here is Sagittarius because Moon and Mercury are there. So it looks like we're still remaining optimistic, we're remaining hopeful. We may be very scattered, especially for those of us that have, like, for instance, a lot of fixed signs in our chart. We may be struggling to accept the level of change that's going on right now. Change is difficult. But again, it looks like we're hopeful, generally speaking. We're optimistic. I do think Sagittarius is the most optimistic sign. And so, in my personal opinion, I think that's a godsend. I mean, yeah, things are so unstable right now. Even Sagittarius itself is very unstable, which is hard for some of us to deal with. But we can still benefit from that warmth and that expansion that comes from those transits. Lastly, for Sunday, one more major bullet point to give you, and then we'll wrap up the forecast. Today, Chiron stations direct at 19 Aries, and honestly, I'm weary of Chiron, especially Chiron in Aries, because thinking about it, like, I think Chiron may be the only kind of planetoid to have a home sign that isn't opposite its domicile sign. I think Chiron is at home in Virgo, but in detriment in Aries. I don't know. I'm kind of toying around with that idea. But my point is, Chiron in Aries is, it's weird. Chiron has to do with empathy. So putting Chiron in the most selfish sign, the most individualistic sign, it has been volatile. There have been a lot of protests since 2018 when Chiron entered Aries. And with Chiron retrograde, where it's coming out of retrograde. So for the past several months, I think there would actually be less turbulence, less protests, and things like that. With Chiron stationing direct now in Aries, we might expect more volatility, more chaos, more protests. The plus side is that, some of us have the courage to speak out about, our plight, our trauma, our own experience. That's really great. That's awesome. But if we're all doing that, if we're all screaming and not listening, that's where it can get very chaotic and destructive, and then that can cause more trauma. So I do think it's a kind of flawed energy. It's not all bad, but I would expect like more protests going forward. That's the main thing I would see. The other thing too is that with Chiron has to do with empathy, and I think we have this kind of rosy idea of wouldn't it be so great if we all had more empathy, but actually seeing that though on a collective level, it can be not just very awkward but also like problematic as well. I don't think we're always ready to like read each other's minds all the time. Going into public, we have certain walls that we keep up. That's why like good manners are always great, but we still have, you don't just tell everyone everything, right? But with that increased empathy, things kind of slip through the cracks. We're, slightly more telepathic, which it can be awkward. That's kind of my point here. If you actually pay attention to Chiron aspects, I find them to be awkward. And it's not just me. But yeah, that's pretty much what I have for you for this forecast, showing you the chart for Monday now. What's interesting about this week that I just covered is that there's no quarter moon, there's no new moon. Technically, we had the quarter moon a day before the forecast, and then we have a new moon the day after. So yeah, I hope you have a great week. Definitely come back next week. We'll talk about a new moon, the new year. Venus changes signs, and we've got some pretty interesting aspects to talk about as well. Okay, have a great week. And again, if you want a reading, hit me up. There's a link on your screen. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Have a fantastic week.